Billy Crystal and Robin Williams spent more than 3 decades making the world laugh together.
He made us laugh big time. I spent many happy hours with Robin on stage. I mean, the brilliance was astounding. The relentless energy was kind of
smile that made him famous, and carrying that knowledge in silence long after
the relentless energy was kind of thrilling. I used to think if I could just put a saddle on him and stay on for 8 seconds, I was going to do okay.
Written with his cooperation about the man he considered a brother.
Going to do okay.
Why that silence weighed so heavily on him, you have to go back to where the friendship started, because it was never a typical Hollywood pairing built on convenience or shared publicity. It was forged in the middle of one of the most competitive creative scenes in American entertainment. In the late 1970s, the stand-up comedy scene in Los Angeles and San Francisco was exploding. Clubs like the Comedy Store and the Improv were packed every night with performers trying to break away from old-fashioned set-up punchline joke telling and find something raw and more spontaneous. Robin Williams was one of the most electric presences to come out of that scene, a performer whose mind seemed to move faster than anyone could follow, jumping between voices, characters, and ideas within a single breath. Billy Crystal was building his own name in the same circuit, developing a sharper, more controlled comic instinct that could hold its own against almost anyone. When the two men met, something clicked immediately. Crystal has described their dynamic over the years as a kind of comedic sparring match, one where he learned how to play off Williams's chaotic energy rather than try to match beat for beat. In one interview promoting the 2018 HBO documentary about Williams's life, Crystal explained that his role was often to bring Williams back to earth, while Williams pulled him in unexpected directions, and that learning how to hold his own in that exchange took real time to figure out. He called it a privilege to trade blows with someone operating on that level. That description says a lot about how their friendship worked from the very beginning. It wasn't Crystal simply setting up jokes for Williams to knock down. It was two comedians who respected each other enough to push one another creatively. In a scene where most performers were far more interested in protecting their own material than building something collaborative. That's a notable dynamic because the comedy club circuit of that era wasn't exactly known for fostering warm collaborations. Stage time was scarce, and comedians often guarded their best bits jealously, wary of anyone who might borrow a premise or a delivery style. Against that backdrop, Crystal and Williams finding a genuine creative partnership rather than a rivalry stood out to people who were there at the time. It also helped set the tone for how each man would go on to talk about the other for the rest of their careers. Neither one ever framed the relationship in competitive terms, even decades later, when it would have been easy to lean into the mythology of two comedy titans battling for the same audience. Instead, both men consistently described feeling lucky to have found someone who understood exactly what they were trying to do on stage, at a time when very few people did. That mutual respect didn't stay confined to comedy clubs for long. It found a much bigger purpose just a few years later, one that would end up defining a huge part of their relationship for the rest of their lives. In 1986, Crystal, Williams, and Whoopi Goldberg became the public faces of Comic Relief USA. A charity telethon aired on HBO and built around raising money and awareness for America's homeless population. The idea of using a live comedy special to tackle something as serious as homelessness was unusual for its time, and there was real uncertainty about whether audiences would embrace it. Instead, the specials became a genuine cultural moment, and the trio kept the tradition going for years, eventually helping raise tens of millions of dollars for housing and healthcare programs across the country. What's easy to forget now, decades later, is just how much of a gamble that whole project was for three comedians at very different points in their careers. None of them needed to attach their names to a cause that risky. Homelessness wasn't an easy subject to make fun of, and there was a real possibility the format could have felt tone-deaf or fallen flat with audiences expecting straightforward entertainment. That the specials worked at all had a lot to do with how genuinely committed all three hosts were to the cause itself, not just the optics of being seen doing charity work. It's part of why the partnership between them deepened so quickly once the telethons began. They weren't just sharing a stage. They were taking a real professional risk together, repeatedly, over a period of years, and watching it pay off in ways that mattered well beyond ratings. What made the partnership more than just a charity gig, according to people close to all three comedians, was how personally invested each of them became in the cause itself, not just the television television special built around it. Filmmaker
San
Marina
Francisco
Zenovich, who directed the Williams documentary and interviewed Crystal extensively for it, later said that sitting down with Crystal was an emotional experience precisely because of how deeply he still felt the loss of that friendship years later. She recalled one line from the film where Crystal said that everyone else wanted something from Williams, but he simply liked him. That's a small detail, but it captures something real about why their bond held up in an industry not exactly known for lasting, uncomplicated friendships. Working that closely together for years, on projects that meant something beyond box office numbers, is also where Crystal and Williams built the kind of trust that let them be honest with each other about things they weren't ready to say publicly. Both men have spoken, separately, about an understanding between their circle of friends to keep certain conversations private. Crystal put it simply in one interview, describing the period before Williams's death as an incredibly difficult time defined by friends trusting each other with their darkest secrets. Secrets he said he intended to keep that way. He has largely honored that. Much of what passed between them in private has never been made public, and Crystal has made clear that's a deliberate choice, not an oversight. That loyalty carried over into their actual work together too, most famously during a film shoot that showed just how much fun the two of them could have even when the script called for something completely different. In 1997, Crystal and Williams starred together in Ivan Reitman's comedy Father's Day, playing two very different men who each believed they might be the father of the same missing teenager. It was the project many fans had been waiting for. A chance to see two of the biggest comedic minds of their generation share the screen for an extended stretch rather than a brief cameo or talk show appearance. By most accounts from people who worked on the film, the set became known for long stretches of improvisation between takes, with Crystal and Williams riffing off each other well beyond what was written on the page. Reitman reportedly used multiple cameras throughout production specifically because the two actors were prone to going off script, and the crew often ended up just as entertained as any future audience would be. That kind of setup, essentially building an entire production around the unpredictability of two performers, was unusual for a major studio comedy at the time, and it reflected just how much trust Reitman placed in their chemistry rather than a tightly controlled screenplay. Years later, Crystal posted a behind-the-scenes photo from that shoot on social media, showing the two of them doubled over laughing between takes, a small but telling glimpse of a friendship that clearly wasn't manufactured for the camera. That same instinct for spontaneous chemistry showed up again on a very different kind of stage 2 years earlier, one that had nothing to do with a movie set at all. In 1989, Crystal, Williams, and Goldberg took part in a comic relief event held at Shea Stadium in New York. And at one point, the three of them ended up in the broadcast booth alongside sports commentator Tim McCarver. Williams, by his own admission, knew almost nothing about baseball, which became part of the bit itself. During the segment, a foul ball actually flew into the booth, and Williams caught it live on air and turned the moment into an instantly memorable piece of unscripted comedy. It's remembered today as one of the clearest examples of what made their collaborations work so well. Neither of them needed a script to find the funniest possible version of a moment. They just needed each other in the room. Moments like that are part of why the public image of Robin Williams was so full of boundless, chaotic energy. But behind that image, according to Crystal's own account years later, something much harder was happening that almost no one outside his closest circle knew about at the time. Robin Williams died on August 11, 2014, at the age of 63. It wasn't until after his death that an autopsy revealed he had been living with Lewy body dementia, a severe neurological disease that had initially been misdiagnosed. The condition affects movement, mood, and cognitive processing, and in Williams's case, it had been causing real physical and emotional changes that even those closest to him didn't fully understand while he was alive. Crystal has spoken about this directly, including in an excerpt from Dave Itzkoff's biography of Williams, published with Crystal's cooperation. In it, Crystal recalled that Williams wasn't feeling well in his final months, but didn't let on to Crystal just how much was happening. Williams would tell him he felt a little crispy, a phrase Crystal said he didn't fully understand at the time beyond sensing that his friend wasn't happy. Crystal also described a specific memory from the fall of 2013 when the two of them hadn't seen each other in 4 or 5 months. When Williams got out of the car to meet him, Crystal said he was taken aback by how thin and frail his friend looked. It's a small human detail, but it's the kind of thing that stays with a person. Watching someone you've known for decades change in ways you can't quite explain and don't yet have the full picture to understand. Crystal has never turned that period of his friend's life into a headline-chasing story. He's talked about it sparingly, usually in the context of honoring Williams rather than sensationalizing his final months, and he's been consistent about protecting the more private conversations between them. That restraint is, in its own way, part of what he said made their friendship real. It wasn't built on performing vulnerability for an audience. It was built on actually showing up for each other away from one. The confusion Crystal described feeling at the time lines up with something Williams's own son, Zach, has since confirmed publicly. Williams had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease shortly before his death, a diagnosis it later turned out was incorrect once the Lewy body dementia was identified during the autopsy. Zach Williams has said in interviews that his father seemed genuinely frustrated during that period, describing symptoms that didn't quite match what most Parkinson's patients experience. According to Zach, his father struggled with focus issues and a kind of internal unease that even those closest to him couldn't fully explain at the time, because the medical picture itself wasn't accurate yet. Zach has said the period was one of intense searching and frustration for his father, and that he wanted to be there for him daily. Even though the isolation of watching someone struggle that way is hard to fully soften no matter how much family support surrounds a person. In the years since his father's death, Zach Williams has become an outspoken mental health advocate in his own right, founding a wellness company and working with organizations focused on suicide prevention and mental health awareness. He has spoken candidly about being deeply traumatized by his father's death and about the anxiety and depression he personally struggled with afterwards, at one point describing himself as self-medicating and unhappy before finding healthier ways to process the grief. He has said that channeling that loss into advocacy work, including volunteering and public speaking about mental health, became one of the most healing things he could do. It's a different kind of tribute than Crystal's quiet Instagram posts or the language he chose at the Emmys, but it comes from the same place, turning private pain into something that might help someone else rather than letting it disappear into silence. That pattern, close friends and family choosing to honor Williams through action rather than exploiting the more painful chapters of his life for attention, shows up again in how Whoopi Goldberg has talked about him as well. Whoopi Goldberg, the third member of the original comic relief trio, has been just as protective of the more private side of that friendship as Crystal has. Asked directly about her personal memories of Williams at a 2016 event marking the opening of the Robin Williams Center for Entertainment and Media, Goldberg was noticeably careful in what she chose to share, acknowledging she had countless memories of him without unpacking the more personal ones for a public audience. That instinct to hold certain things back, shared by both Goldberg and Crystal, says something about the kind of trust the three of them built over decades of working, laughing, and grieving together. In an industry where almost everything eventually becomes content, all three of them have made a point of keeping specific pieces of that friendship for themselves. Documentary filmmaker Marina Zenovich, who spoke with all three comedians while making her 2018 film about Williams's life, has said that interviewing Crystal in particular was an emotional experience because of how present the grief still was, years after the loss. She recalled sensing that Crystal genuinely believed he and Williams would grow old together, and that the realization they wouldn't get that chance was something he was still visibly processing during their conversation. That kind of detail doesn't come from a scripted tribute or a rehearsed talking point. It comes from someone who lost a genuine friend and has had to keep finding new ways to sit with that loss in public, on the anniversaries and interviews and documentary premieres that keep asking him to revisit them. 2 weeks after Williams' death, Crystal was asked to lead a memorial tribute at the 66th Primetime Emmy Awards. Speaking to a live audience and millions of viewers at home while still processing his own grief, Crystal delivered a tribute built around the idea that some stars in the night sky have already burned out, yet their light still reaches us because of how far it had to travel. He closed the tribute by returning to a phrase Williams himself had made famous decades earlier. What a concept. It became one of the most quoted moments of that year's ceremony, not because it was clever, but because it was clearly, visibly real. That tribute stood in stark contrast to one of their happiest shared moments just years earlier. At the 1998 Academy Awards, which Crystal hosted, Williams won his first competitive Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in Good Will Hunting. Crystal has said watching that win and getting to celebrate with his friend on stage remains one of his favorite memories from their entire friendship. A rare instance where all the years of mutual respect and support paid off in the most public way possible. Even more than a decade after Williams' death, Crystal has continued marking the anniversary quietly, including sharing a throwback photo from the Father's Day set on Instagram with a simple caption, "Miss you, my friend." No grand statement, no lengthy essay, just the same kind of understated loyalty that defined their relationship. What comes through most clearly in everything Crystal has said publicly over the years isn't a single shocking revelation. It's something quieter and, in a lot of ways, more meaningful. Two comedians who found in each other a rare kind of trust in an industry that doesn't always make room for it, who protected each other's privacy even when it would have been easy to cash in on it, and who stayed loyal to one another long after the cameras stopped rolling. Crystal has made clear there are parts of that friendship he intends to keep to himself for good, and given everything he shared instead, that choice feels less like withholding a story and more like honoring it. It's also worth stepping back and noticing just how long Crystal has kept this particular story alive without ever letting it curdle into something exploitative. More than a decade after Williams' death, he's still the person reporters call when a new documentary premieres, when a biography gets published, when an anniversary rolls around. He could have said everything he had to say once, in one big interview, and moved on. Instead, he's chosen to release pieces of the story slowly, over years, in whatever context felt appropriate at the time, whether that was a magazine excerpt, a red carpet conversation, or a short caption under an old photograph. That pacing itself says something about how Crystal has approached grief. He hasn't treated it as a story to be told once and closed. He's treated it as an ongoing relationship with a friend who is no longer there to call, one he keeps tending to in small, deliberate ways instead of letting it fade into a single-time narrative. There's also something worth noting about why this particular friendship has resonated with audiences the way it has, long after Williams' death. Hollywood has no shortage of famous duos and legendary creative partnerships, but very few of them get described by the people who actually lived through them in terms of pure affection rather than professional utility. Crystal has never framed his relationship with Williams as a career-boosting partnership or a savvy branding decision. He's consistently described it in much simpler terms. Two people who genuinely liked each other, who made each other better at their craft almost by accident, and who happened to build something meaningful while trying to make people laugh. That simplicity is probably why the story keeps finding new audiences. It doesn't require a scandal or a secret to be compelling. It's compelling because it's rare, even among famous people, for a friendship to look exactly the same behind closed doors as it does in front of the camera. For Crystal, that seems to be the real legacy he's trying to protect, more than any specific untold story. Not a single dramatic revelation, but the simple, harder-to-fake truth that the friendship people saw on stage, on movie sets, and in charity telethons was the same one that existed quietly between two people who trusted each other completely. In an era where so much of celebrity culture runs on manufactured intimacy and carefully managed public images, that kind of consistency is its own quiet story worth telling, even if Crystal has made clear he'll never tell all of it.